Devil's Ear Cave Incident. On August 21st, 2004, Brian Tyndall and 3 friends arrived at Ginny Springs around 8:30 p.m. Brian was 24 years old and had been diving for 3 years. He had done over 100 open water dives. 2 friends took a canoe and another friend went snorkeling. Brian wanted to explore the underwater cave entrances. Brian put on his diving gear. His tank showed 500 psi of air. He took his LED flashlight and did his final checks. Brian's first dive took him to Little Devil at 30 feet deep. The entrance was tight but opened into a large chamber inside. He looked around with his flashlight and went back. Then Brian went to Devil's Eye. This one was deeper at 40 feet with a bigger entrance. He swam just inside and saw multiple tunnels going into darkness. Brian went back to the surface to tell his friends what he saw. Brian was excited about what he had discovered. As the night went on, Brian made several more short dives. His air supply was getting lower with each dive. Around 2 a.m., Brian checked his air gauge. He had about 12 minutes of air left. Brian wanted to check out the main Devil's Ear entrance. He told his friends he would be right back. Devil's Ear opened up at 20 feet deep. The entrance was bigger than the other cave openings. Brian dropped down and swam inside. His light showed the passage was huge at first. He kept swimming deeper, following the main tunnel. Then the ceiling started getting lower. The passage narrowed into a tight squeeze about 4 feet across. Beyond it, his light showed another chamber. Brian thought he could make it through. He positioned himself carefully and started squeezing through. Halfway through, his tank valve caught on something in the ceiling. Brian tried to back out, but he was stuck. He pushed forward, but was still stuck. His movements kicked up sand and dirt from the cave floor. In seconds, the water around him turned brown and murky. His breathing got faster, using up his remaining air. He was locked in place in the darkness, 20 feet underwater and 50 feet inside the cave. Up on the surface, his 3 friends kept waiting. They watched for Brian's light or bubbles to appear. They started calling his name across the water. No bubbles, no light, no Brian. The 3 friends realized something was seriously wrong. They called for emergency help. A Ginny Springs diving instructor got the emergency call. He put on his gear and dropped into Devil's Ear Spring. He swam toward the narrow sections of the cave system. He knew where divers usually got into trouble. There, wedged in the narrow opening, he found Brian. The instructor worked carefully to free Brian from the restriction. Once free, the instructor pulled Brian's body back through the opening. The journey back to the surface took about 10 minutes. Unfortunately, Brian had died in the underwater cave. Seth Rowee's Cave Incident. On June 20th, 2015, Seth Rowee went to explore caves in Singhampton, Ontario. Seth was a 30-year-old outdoor enthusiast. He went to the conservation park with a headlamp and nothing else. Seth wanted to explore hidden crevice caves. He hadn't told anyone where he was going. The cave was unmarked and unnamed. It was a narrow crack in the rocky ground, only 20 inches wide. The entrance dropped steeply into the earth and got narrower as it went down. Seth turned on his headlamp and began to lower himself inside. The walls closed around him quickly. They pressed on his shoulders as he moved deeper. At its narrowest, the passage was just 15 inches wide. Seth had to move very carefully. He reached a point where the cave got even tighter. A section of rock jutted out above him, blocking his path forward. Seth decided it wasn't worth the risk and began to go back. Close to the entrance, Seth put his foot against a small rock outcrop to pull himself up. The stone had been worn down by water for centuries. It shifted under his weight and crumbled away. Seth dropped like a stone and fell 36 feet into the darkness. His body hit the jagged walls before coming to a stop. Seth was wedged in a narrow space far below the surface. Seth was alive, but his situation was very bad. His arms and legs were scraped and bruised. Seth tried to move, but the crevice held him tightly. Seth began calling for help. His voice faded into the silence. By evening, Seth began to lose hope. Then 2 hikers were walking back to the trailhead. They heard faint cries for help. They stopped and listened carefully. They followed the sound to the cave entrance. The hikers looked into the opening and spotted a faint glow far below. Seth's voice reached them. Weak, but clear. The hikers immediately called emergency services. Rescue team arrived quickly. Rescuers lowered water and blankets to Seth. This kept him hydrated and warm while they worked. As midnight approached, they brought in a chisel. They used it to carve away the rock around Seth. The work was very slow. By dawn, Seth had been underground for nearly 20 hours. Rescuers continued chipping away at the rock. Finally, after 22 hours of effort, Seth was freed. He came out pale and battered, but alive. Rescuers wrapped him in blankets and rushed him to an ambulance. His injuries were minor: cuts, bruises, and dehydration. Seth recovered from his ordeal in the unnamed cave. Gruta del Rio Chontalcuatlan Cave Incident. On March 9th, 2003, a group of tourists went to Gruta del Rio Chontalcuatlan in Guerrero, Mexico. The group was poorly equipped visitors led by a local guide. The guide knew the cave passages but lacked safety training and equipment. The entrance to the cave was a steep canyon that dropped into darkness. The upper entrance required climbers to go down a dangerous slope of loose rock. Every step had to be carefully placed. Every handhold had to be tested before trusting it. Maria Santos Torres was excited about the adventure ahead. She had come to Mexico for vacation, seeking thrills and experiences. Maria was partway down the entrance canyon. She carefully placed her feet on narrow ledges. She tested each handhold before putting her weight on it. The rock felt solid under her fingers. Above her, another tourist made a movement. A rock broke free from the formation above. The stone moved toward Maria like a bullet. It was just a few pounds of limestone that had been wedged in place for decades. The stone struck her in the head with a tremendous force. The impact was devastating. The blow to her head caused immediate trauma. It also made her lose her grip on the slope. Her hands released their hold on the rock face. Her feet lost their grip on the narrow ledges. In an instant, she went from being a controlled climber to a falling object. Maria's body struck the rocky slope repeatedly as she tumbled toward the darkness below. Each impact added new injuries to the massive head trauma. The other tourists watched in horror as Maria disappeared into the darkness. Then there was silence. The guide now faced every tour leader's worst nightmare. The group's first instinct was to climb down after her, but the guide stopped them. The guide immediately called rescuers. When rescuers finally reached Maria's body, they confirmed what everyone knew. The combination of the head trauma and the fall had been fatal. Maria had probably died instantly. The injuries were so severe that survival would have been impossible. The body recovery was a complex operation. The rescuers had to package the body carefully as they had to lift it up the dangerous slope without causing more rockfalls. The recovery took hours to complete. When Maria's body was finally brought to the surface, the full horror became clear. What had started as a fun tourist trip had ended in a preventable death. Caribbean Island Cave Incident. In February 1994, two friends named David Parks and Jerry were on vacation on a Caribbean island. They were having a great time enjoying the warm beaches and sunny skies. While talking with local people, they heard about a mysterious cave with a pool inside. It sounded like an exciting adventure. David and Jerry weren't experienced cave explorers or divers, but that didn't stop them. They just grabbed some snorkeling gear and a couple of diving lights and went looking for the cave. When they found the cave, it was more scary than they expected. It was a straight drop, 70 feet down, but they didn't turn back. Carefully, they climbed down the damp walls. Each step took them deeper into the darkness. At the bottom, they found a large room with a pool in the middle. The water was dark and still. What they didn't know was that this pool connected to narrow underwater tunnels. These tunnels ran through the cave with only small air pockets here and there where someone could breathe. David and Jerry were excited. They got into the cold water and turned on their lights. They swam into the first tunnel, coming up for air in the small air pockets when they needed to breathe. The passages were narrow with walls close on all sides. After swimming for a while, they came up in a larger room. This room had a small rock ledge where they could rest. They sat there for a moment, catching their breath. Then they realized they were deep inside the cave, far from the exit. It was time to go back. David went first. At first, everything seemed fine as they swam through the water, but then something bad happened. Their kicking stirred up dirt from the bottom, turning the clear water into a cloudy mess. In seconds, they couldn't see anything. In the confusion, David lost Jerry. He turned around, trying to find his friend, but it was impossible to see. Even worse, he lost his sense of direction. All the tunnels looked the same, and he couldn't tell which way led out. David started to panic as his lungs began to burn for air. David realized he was swimming deeper into the cave instead of out. He couldn't see anything and couldn't breathe. Just when he thought he couldn't hold his breath any longer, his hand found an air pocket. He came up too fast and hit his head on a sharp rock hanging from the ceiling. It hurt, but he was just happy to breathe again. The air pocket was very small. David held onto a narrow rock shelf, breathing hard. The air didn't smell fresh. He felt trapped with the weight of the cave above him. Every second felt like he was running out of time. Meanwhile, Jerry had made it back to the entrance pool. He waited for David, but minutes passed with no sign of him. Jerry started to worry. He shouted into the water and shined his light into the tunnel, hoping to see David. Back in the air pocket, David knew he couldn't stay there much longer. The air wasn't good, and he was running out of options. He put his mask back on and went underwater. He turned off his light, thinking maybe he could see Jerry's light through the cloudy water. Then he saw it, a faint glow in the distance. Taking the deepest breath he could, David pushed off from the rock and swam toward the light. His lungs felt like they were about to burst. Finally, his head broke the surface, and he saw Jerry's bright light. He had made it. Exhausted and gasping for air, he held onto the edge of the pool as Jerry pulled him out. They climbed back up the shaft and out of the cave. When they finally saw sunlight again, it felt like waking up from a bad dream. Roaring River Cave Incident. On October 14th, 2022, a team of special cave divers planned to explore Roaring River Cave. The cave has tunnels that go deep underwater. Eric Hahn, who was 27 years old, had an important job. He would place extra air tanks at certain spots in the cave. These tanks would be safety stops for divers going deeper into the cave. The team had different jobs. 2 divers would go to the deepest parts of the cave. Eric would work with another diver to put extra air tanks at 130 feet and 190 feet underwater. On the morning of the dive, everyone checked their gear carefully. They looked at their equipment, their air supplies, and went over what to do in an emergency. Eric was using a special breathing device called a rebreather. This machine recycles air by removing carbon dioxide and adding just the right amount of oxygen. It lets divers stay underwater longer, but it needs to be watched closely. At 11:12 in the morning, Eric went into the water. He followed a guide rope that would show the way out of the cave. As he went deeper, the water got colder and darker. He used powerful lights to see. 12 minutes later, at 11:24, Eric reached the 190-foot mark. He met one of the deep team divers there. This diver said later that Eric seemed fine at this point. Eric was placing an extra air tank at this spot, just as planned. But just 1 minute later, at 11:25, something bad happened. Eric suddenly crashed into another diver, called Diver 3, and started swimming up very fast. This is dangerous to do when you're so deep underwater. Diver 3 knew right away that something was wrong. He chased after Eric to help him. He caught up when Eric hit his head on the rocky ceiling at 165 feet down. Eric was struggling with his breathing equipment. Things got worse quickly. Diver 3 tried to help by reaching for Eric's emergency breathing tube, but before he could help, Eric pulled out his rebreather mouthpiece without closing it first. This let water flood into his breathing system. As Diver 3 put in the emergency breathing tube and cleared the water, Eric began to shake violently. These shakes were signs of oxygen toxicity seizure. This is a serious medical emergency that can happen when a diver breathes too much oxygen at deep depths. During this kind of seizure, a diver loses consciousness and can't control their body movements. This is very dangerous underwater. Diver 3 tried to hold Eric in a safe position while also keeping the emergency breathing tube in place. This was very hard to do so deep underwater. The pair sank to the bottom of the cave at 204 feet. As they struggled, dirt from the cave floor got stirred up, making it impossible to see. Diver 3 could no longer see the guide rope that marked the way out. If he kept trying to save Eric, both of them might get lost in the cave. Diver 3 was getting very tired, and his own air supply was getting low. Meanwhile, another diver had gone up to get help. Diver 3 had to make the hard choice to leave Eric and start going back up. On his way up, he met another team member, Diver 2, who tried to go down to help Eric. But this diver faced the same problems. Couldn't see well, couldn't find the guide rope, and had dangerous oxygen levels in his own breathing gas. At 11:35, just 23 minutes after Eric had entered the water, another team member saw Diver 3 coming back without Eric. This told the team on the surface that they were no longer trying to rescue Eric, but would need to recover his body. The surface manager made the difficult but necessary decision to stop any more rescue attempts. He told all divers to come back up safely. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, the Missouri Highway Patrol diving team arrived. They found Eric's body at about 200 feet depth, Kalimba Cave incident. In Mexico, there is a beautiful underwater cave system called Sistema Sac Actun. It's the longest underwater cave in the world, stretching over 368 kilometers, 229 miles. It has many tunnels and rooms under the water. In December 2004, 9 divers went to explore a part of this system called Cenote Kalimba. These were experienced divers who had done many dives before. They trusted each other and worked well as a team. The divers arrived on a sunny morning. They carefully checked all their equipment: breathing regulators, air tanks, ropes-colored plastic markers called cookies, used to mark paths. They checked everything twice to make sure it was working. The divers had a clear plan. They would split into 2 teams. Team A would go first and put markers along the way. Team B would follow behind and turn back at a certain point. The cave wasn't very deep, about 33 feet, and they knew the paths well. Everyone felt confident about the dive. Team A went into the water first. The water was clear at the entrance but got darker as they went deeper. They followed the main guideline and carefully marked their path with the colored markers. When they reached the first intersection, they put a yellow marker on the line to show Team B which way to go. Team B entered the water and followed the markers left by Team A. Everything was going as planned. After swimming for 32 minutes, Team B reached the second marker. This is where they made a big mistake. Instead of turning left to go back to the exit, they turned right. The tunnels looked similar in the dark water and they got confused. As they swam, they went deeper into the cave system, away from the exit. They swam for 25 minutes in the wrong direction, going about 1,400 feet further into the cave. Soon they realized something was wrong. The water got colder, and when they moved quickly, they stirred up silt, tiny dirt particles in the water. This made it hard to see. They began to panic. Meanwhile, Team A had finished their dive and returned to the surface. They removed the markers they had placed, not knowing that Team B was lost inside. Team B was now in serious trouble. They stopped at an intersection, finally understanding they had made a wrong turn. One diver tried to find the way back, but found only rock and darkness. Even worse, they were running out of air in their tanks. The divers split into 2 pairs, hoping to find their way back. The first pair swam ahead, looking for familiar markers. When they reached the spot where they had made the wrong turn, they saw something awful. The marker was gone. They had no way to know which path led back. Their hearts beat faster as they realized they were lost. When people panic, they breathe faster, which uses up air more quickly. Soon, one diver's tank was almost empty. He had to share air with his partner, both of them taking turns breathing from the same tank. On the surface, Team A realized something was very wrong. Team B should have been back by now. Grabbing extra air tanks, some divers went back into the water to search for their friends. They didn't have to search long. Just 250 feet from the exit, they found the first pair from Team B. They were barely alive with almost no air left, but they were safe. The rescuers asked where the other two divers were. The first pair said they had seen the lights of their teammates not far behind. The rescuers waited, but no one else appeared. The rescuers went back into the cave, hoping to find their friends alive. In the dim light of their flashlights, they saw two still figures floating near the cave ceiling. The two divers had run out of air. Their air tanks, when checked later, were completely empty. They had died in the cave they came to explore.